My name's Lucas. I'm 27, and Easter was supposed to be a quiet weekend back home with my family, just a chance to breathe after a stressful few months at work. I live a few hours away, working in digital product design for a mid-sized firm. In between travel, deadlines, and just life, I hadn't visited in maybe 6 months. I still called, sent birthday cards, helped with bills when things got tight, and made time for holidays like this one. So when I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in, coffee in one hand, suitcase in the other, I wasn't expecting to find a silver SUV in my usual spot, or a pair of unfamiliar shoes outside the front door, or strangers in matching pajamas waving at me from what used to be my bedroom window. At first, I thought I had the wrong day. Maybe I'd mixed something up. But then I walked up the porch steps and tried the front door. Locked? Not unheard of. Dad's been paranoid about break-ins lately, but still weird for Easter morning. I knocked, and knocked again. Nothing. Eventually, I pulled out my phone to call my mom. No answer. Dad didn't pick up either. I stood there on the porch for another few minutes, shivering slightly from the breeze, until I heard a voice behind me. Lucas. It was my grandma, Dad's mom, who's lived in the in-law suite out back ever since her health started declining a few years ago. She looked surprised to see me, and maybe a little uncomfortable. I gave her a quick hug, and she motioned for me to follow her around the side gate. When we got into her tiny kitchen, she handed me a chipped teacup and said, gently, "You might want to sit down before you see the note." I didn't sit. I walked to the fridge instead, and there it was, taped front and center. A single sheet of printer paper, bold text in Comic Sans. Lucas, your room is currently rented on Airbnb. We needed the extra income, you're never around anyway. Your things are in the garage. Please don't disturb the guests. My mouth went dry. I read it twice. 3 times. I turned to Grandma and asked, "Is this a joke?" She just sighed and shook her head. "They listed it last month. Figured you wouldn't be back till summer. But they didn't call. Didn't ask." Grandma gave me a long look over the rim of her teacup. "Funny how they only remember you when the bills show up." I felt my stomach twist. I left my suitcase in her room and walked out to the garage. My things were there, all right, shoved into plastic bins and mismatched cardboard boxes, half of them torn or collapsing. My clothes were wrinkled, some damp from a leak in the roof that had clearly been ignored. My high school trophies, a few old photo albums, even the childhood sketchbook I thought I'd lost, all stuffed haphazardly into a corner, like trash no one had gotten around to throwing away. I just stood there, staring at it all. The smell of mildew and motor oil hit me like a punch to the face. It wasn't just about the room. It was what it meant. That they didn't even think I was worth a phone call. That I was an inconvenience, a guest in my own home. I stayed silent the rest of the day. Ate Easter lunch at Grandma's. Avoided the main house. My parents never came to see me, not even to check if I'd gotten the note. I saw them through the window once, laughing with the Airbnb guests, offering extra towels and fresh muffins like they were running a cozy little B&B. I felt like I'd fallen through some crack in the floorboards of my own life. That night, I helped Grandma with her medications and got her settled in for bed. She patted my hand before I left the room. "You don't deserve this," she said softly. "You've always been the good one." And somehow that turned into being the forgotten one. I slept on her pull-out couch, tossing and turning until morning. I kept thinking about every little thing I'd done for them over the years. The laptop I'd bought for Dad when his old one died. The last-minute rent payment for my sister when she was between jobs. The time I called in sick to work just to help Mom set up for a neighborhood fundraiser. I remembered how they used to gush about me to their friends, call me their responsible one. How proud they said they were. But none of that seemed to matter now, not when there was a chance to make a few $100 a weekend from tourists looking for a quiet stay in the suburbs. Tuesday came and went, and no one said a word. No apology. No explanation. I finally confronted them on Wednesday. Walked right up to the house, rang the doorbell. My mom answered, her face full of fake surprise. "Lucas, you made it," she said, like she hadn't left a passive-aggressive eviction notice on the fridge. "I've been here since Sunday," I said. She blinked. "Oh, well, you didn't say anything. You didn't leave me much to say." Dad came over then, folding his arms like he was already annoyed. "Look, we didn't think it would be a big deal. You're not here most of the year. We figured you'd understand. The house needs work, and this helps cover costs. And you didn't think to call? Ask if it was okay. We didn't think you'd care," he said flatly. "You've got your own place. Your own life. You're not a kid anymore, Lucas." I laughed, actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so surreal. You didn't even move my stuff with any care. Half of it's ruined." Mom rolled her eyes. "It's just old things. You should have gone through it years ago." I looked at both of them, and in that moment, something inside me just shifted. I realized I wasn't going to get an apology. They didn't see me as their son anymore. Not really. I was a donor, a backup plan, a name on a check when they needed to keep the lights on. I walked away without another word, back to Grandma's place. She didn't ask what they said, just handed me another cup of tea and squeezed my shoulder. By Thursday morning, I was making phone calls. Not to scream, not to argue, but to pull some very particular levers. Grandma had mentioned once, in passing, that the house wasn't technically in my parents' names. It was left to her by Grandpa, and she let them live in it rent-free under the condition that they maintained it. But there had been some recent talks, quiet ones, about finally transferring ownership. She wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. Not after how they treated me. So we made some calls. To the lawyer. To the bank. To Airbnb. By Friday afternoon, everything was in motion. That was the day the guests were evicted. And that was just the beginning. The guests, a couple from Chicago on some kind of off-the-grid suburban retreat, didn't even look mad when they left. Just confused. I watched from Grandma's porch as they packed up their bags, tossing them in the back of their Prius. The woman looked over at me, holding her reusable coffee cup like a shield. "Sorry if we caused any trouble," she said softly. The place was listed as family-friendly. "We didn't realize." I gave her a polite smile and just said, "It's not your fault." They drove off without incident. That part was easy. Airbnb compliance had been surprisingly fast, probably helped by the fact that I submitted a notarized letter from the legal owner of the house. Grandma hadn't transferred the deed yet. And now? She had no plans to. My parents didn't even realize anything had happened until early evening. I heard the door slam from across the yard. My dad stormed out barefoot, his phone in one hand and his face blotchy with anger. "Lucas," he barked. "What did you do?" I stepped off the porch slowly, calm and deliberate. I let the guests know the listing was fraudulent. Grandma never signed off on turning her property into a hotel. His nostrils flared. "This is our home." "No," I said. "It's hers. And she's been generous for years, letting you stay here without rent, without contributing to taxes, repairs, or anything else. Listing it on Airbnb? That violated the terms of her trust. She could have kicked you out at any time." My mom appeared behind him then, her eyes wide with confusion. "Lucas, why would you go behind our backs like this?" "Behind your backs?" I repeated, genuinely stunned. "You dumped my belongings in the garage like I was a stranger. You gave my bedroom to tourists and left me a note on the fridge. You didn't just go behind my back. You walked over me." They fell silent, and I let the silence stretch. "Grandma's done being used," I added. "You call it your home, but it's not. And now she's transferring the deed to me." That part caught them both off guard. Dad's mouth dropped open, and Mom sputtered. "She wouldn't." "She did. Yesterday. We filed the paperwork this morning. I'll be the legal owner by next week." For a moment, it was like time froze. My dad's face slowly turned a dangerous shade of red. "You think you can just kick us out?" "I'm not kicking anyone out," I said. "But the tenancy agreement will change. You'll pay rent, just like any other tenants. Or you can find somewhere else. You've had a decade of free living, it's time." Mom's voice cracked. "We're your parents. And I was your son," I shot back. "Until I became your backup wallet and your spare room. You don't get to play the victim now." That night, they didn't speak to me. I didn't see them come out for dinner. Grandma and I ate in silence, a soft classical record playing on her old turntable. She was more tired than usual, but there was a quiet peace in her face I hadn't seen in years. "They always thought you'd just keep giving," she said softly. "Because you never made a fuss." I nodded. "They thought low maintenance meant disposable." She smiled weakly. "Funny thing about people like that, they only notice when the faucet turns off." Friday night passed with eerie quiet. Saturday, the text started. First from my sister. "Mom says you're trying to make them homeless? What is going on?" Then from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Dude, Grandma's giving you the house? I thought your parents were supposed to inherit it." By noon, it was a full-blown circus. My dad was making angry calls to the lawyer's office, which were promptly ignored. It was the weekend, and my mom was crying on the phone to anyone who'd listen. I even saw her whispering to Grandma once, eyes wet, voice shaky. "Please," she said. "We didn't think he'd be so cruel." I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Grandma looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, you just thought he'd keep letting you walk all over him." That night, They came to my room, my actual bedroom now, back in Grandma's suite, where I'd started slowly bringing in the boxes they'd dumped in the garage. My dad knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for me to answer. He looked tired. Not in the way a person looks after a bad day, this was deeper. Like something had finally settled into his bones. "We'll pay rent," he said. "Whatever it takes. Just don't take this away from us." My first instinct was to feel bad, to give in, like I always had. But then I remembered the note on the fridge, the boxes in the garage, the way they smiled and waved at strangers while pretending I didn't exist. "You'll pay rent," I replied, "and you'll sign a lease. When I draft, with terms that respect the property and Grandma." He didn't argue, just nodded and walked out. I don't think we spoke for the rest of the night. But the storm was far from over. Because Sunday, the doorbell rang and standing there was someone I hadn't seen in years. And the moment I opened the door and locked eyes with them, I knew this wasn't just about a bedroom anymore. The person at the door was my uncle, my dad's younger brother, Mark, the so-called black sheep of the family. He'd left town over a decade ago after a falling out so loud it ended with furniture being thrown and my grandmother sobbing into her hands. I hadn't seen him since I was 16. He looked older now, leaner, with streaks of gray in his beard and tired eyes that scanned the house like a battlefield. But he still had that confident walk, the kind of swagger that made people nervous without knowing why. "Lucas," he said, giving me a nod like we'd seen each other last week. "Uncle Mark." I stepped back instinctively, letting the door swing open wider. He took the invitation without hesitation, stepping inside and glancing around like he was remembering the layout. "Been a long time," he said. "Place looks smaller." I followed him into the living room. "Yeah, well, some things shrink when you stop romanticizing them." That made him chuckle. "You always were the sharp one." I didn't respond. I didn't know why he was here yet, but the way he scanned every corner made me uneasy. He finally turned to face me. I heard what happened. The deed transfer. The eviction. The whole family's melting down. News travels fast. He smiled faintly. "Especially when it involves this house." I was about to ask what he meant when I heard another voice, Grandma's, from down the hallway. "Mark," she called out, her tone sharp. "What are you doing here?" Mark looked toward her and gave a small nod. "Just wanted to see the place one last time. Didn't know it was already changing hands." Grandma appeared slowly from the hallway, leaning on her cane, her face unreadable. "You've got no business here." "Maybe," he said. "But I figured since everyone else is treating this place like a pawn shop, I'd at least stop by before the roof gets turned into a rooftop bar." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't get clever with me." Mark sighed, suddenly looking older than he had a moment ago. "I'm not here to fight, Ma. I just needed to see it. One more time." The air between them was heavy, filled with old arguments and unspoken truths. I stood awkwardly between them until Grandma finally waved a hand toward the sofa. "5 minutes. Then you go." Mark sat down like it pained him to do it. I stayed standing. "You know," he started, "your dad and I weren't always like this. There was a time we were close. Real close. But this house, it poisons people." Grandma scoffed. "This family poisoned itself. Don't blame the bricks." Mark looked at me then. "She never told you, huh?" I glanced between them. "Told me what?" Grandma didn't answer. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. Mark leaned forward. "This house wasn't supposed to be theirs. It wasn't even supposed to be yours. Grandpa left it to me." The words hung there like a snapped guitar string. I blinked. "What?" "It was in his will," Mark continued. "Clear as day. But right after the funeral, a new version of the will appeared, signed, dated, and mysteriously notarized a week before he died. It left everything to your dad." I turned to Grandma, waiting for her to deny it. She didn't. "He changed his mind," she said stiffly. Mark's eyes flashed. "No, you changed his will. You and Dad pressured him when he could barely speak. And I left because I couldn't fight you both." My mind was spinning. "Is this true?" Grandma looked down at her hands. "Your grandfather was sick." Confused. "And yes, I may have encouraged him to rethink things. But I did what I thought was best." Mark scoffed. "No, you did what was easiest. You knew Dad wouldn't survive without a safety net, and I refused to play nursemaid. So you cut me out." A silence stretched, brittle and dangerous. Mark stood slowly. "I don't want the house anymore. But I wanted you to know, Lucas, this place has always been the center of every bad decision in this family. Don't let it ruin you too." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and one more thing. You might want to check the mortgage records. Your dad took out a line of credit on the house 5 years ago." without permission. Bet your name's on it now. Then he walked out. I didn't move for a long time. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Finally, I looked at Grandma. Is that true? She closed her eyes, just for a second. He said it was just to cover a few repairs. I felt cold. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought he'd pay it off. I thought he'd be decent. I walked back to the garage, pulled out my laptop, and logged into the county property records. It took 30 seconds to find it. Home equity line of credit. Opened in both Grandma's and my dad's names. The outstanding balance? $72,000. Suddenly, everything made sense. The Airbnb guests, the desperation, the note on the fridge. They weren't just trying to make side income. They were trying to save themselves. By sacrificing me. I closed the laptop, my hand shaking not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was theft. And I was done being quiet. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. Anger had come and gone. It was something colder now. Focused. I stared at the ceiling of the guest room in Grandma's in-law suite and realized how deep this hole went. How every time I thought I understood the depth of their selfishness, another layer peeled back, uglier than the last. They'd taken out a loan against a property they didn't even own. They hadn't paid it off. And they'd tried to cover the cracks with Airbnb listings and gaslighting. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the money. It was that they knew. They knew they were sinking. And instead of reaching for help, they used me as a life raft and never once asked if I was drowning too. By morning, I had a plan. I called the bank first, pretending to be my dad. It wasn't hard. I'd helped him with his online accounts a dozen times over the years, reset passwords, set up autopay, even built the budget spreadsheet he never used. When the automated prompts asked for verification, I entered the exact digits I remembered from setting up his profile. Within minutes, I had access to everything. And it was worse than I thought. The loan had been taken out quietly, months after Grandpa passed. The first few years, they made the payments on time. But 5 years ago, right around the time Dad was between jobs, the payments got erratic. Then stopped. They'd tried refinancing twice, both denied. Late fees ballooned the original amount. Grandma had no idea. But the worst part? They'd listed my name as an emergency contact and claimed I would co-sign if necessary. The application had a forged digital signature, mine. It wasn't even close to my actual one. That was enough for legal action, right there. I printed everything out. Then I called the lawyer we'd used to transfer the deed. Her name was Nadine, and she was sharp in that unnerving, perfectly composed way lawyers always are. I explained the situation and sent her the documents. Her response was short. What they did is fraud. You can press charges, or we can use this as leverage to push them out cleanly. Up to you. I sat with that decision for a long time. And then I chose the option they'd never see coming. Public shame. It started with a single email to our neighborhood association. I'd never thought much about them. Just a bunch of retirees who argued about lawn height and mailbox paint. But they were obsessed with rules. And short-term rentals like Airbnb? Strictly prohibited. I attached screenshots of the listing, guest reviews, and the exact dates my parents had rented the room out. Then I CC'd the city's zoning board. By noon, a notice had been placed on the front door, immediate suspension of unauthorized short-term rental activity. Next, I reached out to a friend of mine, Liam, who worked at the local news station. He owed me a favor. I told him everything. The loan, the forged signature, the eviction of a family member for profit. I even sent him a screenshot of the note on the fridge. He called it local gold. By Sunday evening, a story aired on the 6 o'clock news. Family accused of renting out son's childhood bedroom without consent, then using his name to secure loans. They blurred our last name, but everyone in town knew. The house was unmistakable. The backyard, with the rusting swing set. The shot of Grandma drinking tea on the porch. She looked calm, dignified. She didn't say a word to the reporter, just sipped her tea and gave a knowing smile. And then came the fallout. The first text from my dad came at 6:15 p.m. What did you do? Then another. You're destroying us. This isn't how family handles problems. Then my mom. You've humiliated us. Why would you go this far? I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I waited until Monday morning. Then I walked up to the front door, past the yellow zoning notice, past the empty flower pots, past the porch I used to sit on every summer night, and rang the bell. They answered together. Mom's face was puffy. Dad's jaw was clenched. I have a lease here, I said calmly. pulling out the folder from my bag. Nadine drafted it over the weekend. You have two choices. They didn't speak. 1. You sign this lease and agree to pay rent, backdated to the day the deed transferred. You'll also pay restitution to Grandma for the illegal listing, the damage to the house, and the forged loan application. Or 2. I paused. I pressed charges. For fraud, for identity theft, and for elder exploitation. My mother gasped. My father's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't swing. He didn't shout, because he knew I meant it. They took the folder, didn't sign it, just closed the door. 2 days later, I got the email. Lucas, we'll be out by the end of the week. We can't afford the rent. We didn't mean for it to get this bad. We're sorry. They left Friday morning. Didn't even knock on Grandma's door. Didn't say goodbye. Just packed their things into 2 cars and drove off like ghosts in the fog. I watched from the living room window. I didn't wave. And then, just like that, the house was quiet again. In the days that followed, I cleaned out the garage, reorganized my old things, donated what I didn't need. Grandma and I shared dinners on the porch, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing stories from when I was little. She looked lighter, like a weight had been lifted off her chest. You did the right thing, she said one night. They would have drained you dry and blamed you for being empty. I just didn't want to be their fallback plan anymore. She nodded slowly. You never were. You were the future. They just didn't know how to let go of the past. A month later, I received a letter. No return address. Just a folded sheet of notebook paper, scrawled in my father's messy handwriting. We made mistakes. A lot of them. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope one day you'll understand why we panicked. We weren't trying to hurt you. We were just trying to survive. Take care of your grandmother. She deserves better than we gave her. So do you. I folded it up and tucked it in a drawer. Some things don't need a response. Instead, I focused on the repairs. Painted the walls. Fixed the broken tile in the kitchen. Replaced the front porch swing. I even started growing vegetables in the backyard with Grandma's help. She said the soil had been neglected for too long. Just like me. Now, when people ask where I live, I don't say my parents' house. I say it's mine. Because I claimed it. Not just the deed, not just the walls and roof, but the right to stand up for myself. To stop being invisible. To stop being the easy one they could always count on, because I never complained. Now they know. I'm not the backup plan. I'm the main character in my own story. And this chapter? This one ends with peace.